cringy. It's also the time in which I get all my nerves out, and I'm very shaky, and I read really fast. But I just want to say that tonight I think it's actually really quite meaningful and necessary to read your bio. So I'm going to do it. I'm so sorry. So David R. Harper has received his BFA from NASCAD, as you heard, and his MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in Fiber and Material Studies. His work has been exhibited in a wide range of institutions, including the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, the Everson Museum in Syracuse, the Crocker Museum in Sacramento, the Gardner Museum right next door in Toronto, Mass MoCA in North Adams, the Villa Terrace Decorative Arts Museum in Milwaukee, and the Contemporary Zoological Conservatory in Toronto. And currently teaches in painting and drawing department, the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and what? And that as well. And is that who we have over here? And so, and I did that just because I also think as an alumni event, we're here to really celebrate the momentum of David's career, to understand what it meant to be from the doors of NASCAD to the stage at Rome, to the huge exhibition at the Art Gallery Burlington. Because from his bio, you can see that he has a really wide reach. So sorry, David, not only is the embarrassment of reading your bio, but I'm actually going to extend it painfully. So that his work really traverses the intersection of contemporary art and craft and archives. And he's done so with the extraordinarily effortless move between those institutions through dedicated media-specific galleries, to critical contemporary spaces, to museums with distinct archival collections. But he navigates them all with the same ease and dexterity and comfort, allowing all of their audiences to engage in difficult conversations about the complexity of our collective emotional landscapes. In this moment, I also want to acknowledge too, all those professional milestones through the many arts institutions and academies that have trusted him and opened up their spaces to him and their audiences. But it's really, again, not how galleries have trusted you, but how you have trusted them. It's really a privilege to be able to gain your trust. And I know that David, when he comes, has to believe that the artists, the curators, the educators will come to the table with as much effort and care as he does to foster the right environments and conditions for his work to come to life. Because the intellectual investment and the, as you'll see, very extreme, meticulous labor that he extends in his production and process is truly a gift. Simply put, David transforms institutions. Galleries and museums have to listen, to be open, to be willing, and equal partners in the journey. The stories he tells and the beautiful objects that he creates change the fabric of an institution and all of the spaces that they inhabit. His work challenges their histories and builds complicated paths for understanding new ideas. So that's where I want to start tonight, is with the journey, or the process of the journey, or the process of an idea and a journey. So if we go to your installations, specifically the ways in which some of this is working out now, how are the big ideas that are present in your work, and the notions of stillness present, and how is it important to consider stillness?
That's a big question. Thank you. That is the question. Stillness has been kind of the thread that has run through my work since leaving undergrad. And it's taken a long time to figure out, and I don't think that I've ever figured out what it is that initially drew me to stillness, but in the studio, it's a continuous exploration of that idea. And I was saying to some students earlier today that when I started with this idea, I didn't even know that that was the thing just started making work. And then it took a few years to realize, like, why am I making the particular type of work I'm making? Why am I focusing on, natural history museums, vitrines, holding things still? What is it that I'm obsessed with? And I haven't figured it out. And I don't think I ever will, but that is the underlying premise of everything, is our understanding of what it means to stop everything, to be still. I don't even, I can't even comprehend an end to this exploration, because every time I start a new work in the studio, I'm thinking about stillness and the different ways that we use it and feel it in our lives. And it's just been, this tool, this really great tool that I use, and then I use the language that I can think of, and that's the studio process, right? Like, I think of different materials and ways of making and objects that exist in the world and how to emulate those things that convey this idea of stillness.
What was the importance of stillness?
What was the importance of stillness? I wish I. What is it?
Or what is it?
What is the importance of stillness? I wish I could be still. I wish I knew what it felt like for everything, for like every molecule of my being to just stop for a second, to have like no emotional thought, to have no physical needs, I just want to experience like what it's like to be outer space.
And do you feel like that's what your installations do, is provide a cosmos, a stillness for individuals to come in?
Their efforts to do it. I think, with some of the larger installation works that I started doing back in about 2015, there was this need to be immersed in something so that the viewer could be stopped and feel pause and look through the objects and kind of parse apart the different narratives that I was laying out. When I started doing immersive installations or larger works, it was a way to, invite the viewer to have a visceral reaction to the space and be enveloped, with these tangible things that I've created. I wanted people to be able to step into my world a little bit, the worlds that I was trying to create. Yeah.
And they're also a record of time. Your own time.
Yeah.
But also the deconstruction of the fact that time isn't real.
Time is not real. I get flustered with the idea of thinking about the labor that goes into these, because, what were we going to say? The concept of labor is very complicated for me, and I never wanted it to be the focus of the work. I engage in the types of materials and making I do because I need to see those things made out of those things, not because I'm trying to impress people with how long it takes me to make them. But inevitably, people know that because of the materials I choose to use, there's a lot of time embedded into these efforts. But yeah, and for me, it's never been the focus. I truly wish I could disappear, when I present these works to the world. I don't want people to think about me at all, which is really complicated as an artist, because I have to be there. I have to show up in these works in order for them to be mine. But I wish that they could just exist in the world without me having done it.
And they do and they don't.
Yeah.
Because you are also really embedded in the work. Like, your personal narratives and histories are embedded in a lot of the works as well.
I'm getting braver, and I'm getting better at it.
Yeah. And abstractly so.
Yeah.
But also your hand is, and it is hard because, like, if you're seeing the images behind us too, like, you're seeing some of the craftsmanship that's in this. So it's like years of learning and years of making and understanding. I think that when David has an idea and wants it to be translated, it can be translated into any form and material. And unlike many, it's not actually put out into manufacturing or being fabricated elsewhere. So if David wants to wants a cabinet, if it needs to be translated into cabinet, he learns joinery. If it needs to be translated he learns how to blow glass. And every single piece has your hand, the record of your hand on it. So when you have an idea, how do you translate that into material form?
It starts, like I see the piece, and it's hard not to make this sound hokey, but, I see it, but do it, make it hokey. Yeah, like I don't like to draw things out, and I don't keep notes very often, and so I'll have a vision of something, and it's usually just like a little spark, a section of something. And so for instance, like when I did my own personal ghost, is a great example, where I wanted to envision like an atelier or a studio, and I was thinking about this notion of what happens in this space when the artist leaves. Does the work continue itself without the physical presence of the artist? I'm dreaming, the work is continuing, at home, off-site, on walks, but in the space, a little bit of fantasia, are these objects continuously making themselves? Because that's the way I think about, these works, is I'll have a spark, I'll see a little fragment of it, and then thinking through the materials that I want to use and the processes that I want to use to make it, that will lead to another thing. And so they are building themselves, because one material or one technique will tell me what to do next. So I only need to start with a fragment, and then the work tells me where to go. And that's where it sounds hokey. But it really, like, if I'm figuring out how to take weavings that I'm doing myself and turn them into these three-dimensional forms, and then blowing them out and having them layer, covering them in butterflies, like, I'm continuously like seeing new things in the work and deciding to elaborate on it. And material, that's why I love the materials that I work with, is because they tell me what comes next. If I figure out how to cast dehydrated milk, I'm like, oh, why not figure out how to cast dehydrated honey? And then you realize that one is way harder than the other, and then that opens up a whole new challenge in the studio. So this is dehydrated. So yeah, one thing, the work tells me what to do, and one thing leads to another. And because I'm so drawn to things that already exist in the world, like, objects that you see in your day-to-day life, or things that we assign value to, like museum objects. When I create these, I want them to seem like they've already existed as well. And taking on that process means that, like, if I'm going to start making perfume bottle, or if I want perfume bottles in the work, and I want them to look a certain way, I have to make them. And so that's the process that I take on.
That's bonkers.
It is absolutely bananas.
And it is hard as a viewer not to, or maybe not necessarily as a viewer, because when you are enveloped in these, you really do suspend the belief of the artist's hand being present. I think that you've talked about it a lot as like the dust or the residue from your studio being present in the spaces. So much so that when you're talking about it, such as the exhibition that we're working on together with Midnight, is that it's really easy for me to have that kind of, not like that monumental task of saying there's 10,000 objects in one installation. There's more than that. Plus. And in saying that, that's extremely impressive, but being in the space somehow that disappears, and it is actually not what it's about. And it's really hard not to want to verbalize that as the feet, but the feet is the environment that you create, the stillness that you create in that. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about Midnight and how it can be.
Yeah, Midnight is probably the best example of me maybe getting closer to figuring out if I actually understand what it is that I make. I'm getting close every day. And it's also great because it's deeply related to NASCAR. I have two mentors that I'm very fortunate to acquire. They acquired me. and Steve Higgins, and they really took me in when I was a pup, and believed in me quite a bit. But it was, I created this piece of work largely off of something that Steve told me when I was young, and I was trying to figure out the space in between making things. What do you do, like, in between the big idea? What's the little idea? What's the little thing that you work on to keep yourself going? And so Steve gave me the language. He was talking about, like, just go to the studio and push the broom. Just always keep yourself in the space and working. And then it was Jan, going over to their house and watching her cook food, and how slowly she cuts herbs, and not in like you're being annoying, but in a delicate and meaningful way. Everything is done with intention, and she also has those beautiful hands. And she makes video work where she has used her hand before to trace the lines inside of a home, and but even just like in both of their practices, how they treat time and how fast or how slow they move, editing video, building monolithic installations. They were kind of the spark for this project, and it's hard because I've built this thing for you and for Burlington that is it is the ending to something that I've been working on for over a decade. These are the culminations of like the space in between. These are the ideas that existed between projects that I didn't think would ever have value enough to show in a major museum exhibition. But they are the most valuable objects because they're the ones that I just inherently know how to do from love and from trust. And so, yeah, it's a big deal for me to drop this idea that the thing that I'm presenting has to be the big idea, and it can just be the small ideas in between presented as the biggest idea. So for context, Midnight is, back in, I think it was 2015, I made my first bird form for a project, and I had started using them on my stay files, these mobile pieces that had these birds in flight that were static in the air. And then I started making them out of ceramic. I've made them out of almost every material that I use in my studio, so bone and charcoal. Then I started making them out of pigmented clay, and just black pigmented clay. And they're so lovely to make, just because of how they occupy my time. And you cast them in 4 parts, then you assemble them, and you smooth the seams out, and you're very tender with them, and then your fingerprints end up on the bodies of these birds. And I started making them, just like in between things. If I had time, even if I was waiting for glue to dry, I would make birds. If I was between projects, I would make birds. And I presented the first iteration of Midnight at the Everson Art Museum a few years ago, and I just knew that I wasn't done. And it was about 500 birds. I've continued to use that same form over and over again. So I knew that it was important. It was that marker. It was pushing the broom. It was cutting things slowly. It was, taking care of myself. And so then when you asked if I wanted to see it through, whatever that meant, I felt like it was time. And so I made a lot of them.
A lot of them.
10,322. So, but the intention is not the number. I don't care about the number. The number doesn't mean anything. It's the space it fills. And so I always wanted, when I showed them in its entirety, for somebody to be able to walk into this room and be completely enveloped by these birds. And it's like, an ornithological collection. Like when you pull the drawers of birds out here at the ROM and you have them all laid out together. They're presented in a similar way, but on the walls. And so you go into this space and it's like you're laying with them or you're enveloped by them because of the material, because they're such thin ceramic, it changes the way sound works in the space. But I always knew that I just needed the viewer to be completely enveloped in this. For that moment that I was talking about earlier, where I'm just trying to force you into this moment of stillness.
who's amazing, and it's not lost on me that his last name is Peck. And, but he's so generous in like pulling out all the drawers, showing us the process of from when a bird enters the space to being marked, to going into installation. And he was asking me about why we were here and David's practice. You know, I made some sort of like overarching, very ignorant statement of like, oh, it's about grief, it's about trauma, loss, all this, and like I could like see his eyes roll back, and he's like, why is it that everything has to be about death? And I realized then afterwards, actually, what David had been saying all along is that it's not about death. Stillness and death and grief do not all come hand in hand. That with David's work, there's a lot of joy that is alongside the sorrow. Much like the birds in the drawers here, is that they have moved on from one life into another, where a lot of their genome research continues to tell stories of migration, continues to tell stories of climate change, continues to tell stories, and that's what I think that all of your birds do in that space. I can't remember where I was going with that.
That's okay. We're all allowed to leave our bodies.
Exactly. But you did bring up Jan, and your relationship with her, and your ongoing relationship with her. I know how much of a mentor she is to you. But I want to ask about your own mentorship through the work that you do as an artist in your studio, when like you spend the afternoon with Sheridan students, to the students that you work in an institutional capacity. Can you talk about how important that role is for you to continue to be that?
Yeah, I didn't teach for a long time. I think, you know, I graduated from NASCAD, and the sculpture department carved out this kind of made-up position for me at the school for a year, because they needed somebody to teach in the foundry. And so it was very like bizarre, and I don't even know if it was professionally recorded or not. But I was like a substitute for Steve. And so when Steve's section of sculpture did their foundry component, I stepped in and did that. And it was lovely, but you know, too soon to start teaching. You know, I still hadn't figured out myself. And I'm a very good technical teacher. I can convey how to do things pretty easily. But it took me a long time to be comfortable and figure out how to talk to students about their ideas and growing their ideas. And so I've started teaching more and more over the last couple of years, and I really do love it. But it's complicated because I'm coming to it so late and having not really thought about what my role as a professor is. I'm really just eager for them to experience some of the same joys that I got to experience so early on as an artist. And so I'm not trying to replicate mentorship, but like I want to give my students, you know, answers as fast as possible so that they can skip, you know, the messy parts that sometimes we have to go through. But maybe that's wrong, because maybe we do need those messy parts. But I really do enjoy it. I also do, you know, I have a lot of other artists that come to my studio to figure out how to build things, and I've done that. I have an intimate relationship with that for the last few years, where I'm kind of giving up the ghost a little bit, and because I've figured out creative ways, you know, to cast certain things or build certain things, I have like a group that will come by to ask me for advice, and that's mentorship for me as well. Even though they're my peers, just having this knowledge base of materiality and the fact that I can give it to people, I love to do that. So yeah, I don't know, it was so meaningful, you know, like, when I was in school, yes, I learned how to do some technical things, but it was really, for me, it was just learning how to be a human being in this world. Those were the big things, like, you know, watching certain peers of mine, you know, figure things out, and in school, and then the rest I knew because I really like being an autodidact. I really like just learning new things. I'll figure the rest out later. But for me, the best help you can get from another artist or an artist teacher is just those little ways, like how do we do this? How do we find joy in making work? How do we not let it envelop us? How to do it healthfully? Those are things that I like to pass on. I feel like a sense of responsibility because I was taken care of so nicely by people, by other artists, that I feel like it's my turn to do it in a way. Yeah.
And you also continue to do that with the exhibitions too. I'm just thinking about many times when you talk about the presence and absence within that space. It's like specifically the Art Gallery of Burlington, where all of our studios are there. We have so many makers that are in through that space. So understanding your adept way of using old technologies in new ways and seeing them in the space definitely fills their studios up with ideas as well. But then we'll bring me to like all the places that you've actually taught in, that you've moved through, that you've had exhibitions in. How does the places that you live, how do they change the way that you think about working and your working practices?
That's a great question. I thought for the longest time that I needed to stay in one place, and that's how I felt about Halifax. Because I was like, great, I've got good friends, I've got a great job, I've got a studio, I'll stay here for the rest of my life and do this one thing. But I saw, lots of people saw how it started to kind of shrink me a little bit. And so I went on an adventure, and I moved to Chicago for grad school. It was a big move for me emotionally to leave that place, to leave Halifax. But it started something big. It made me realize that you get to like, not reinvent yourself in a weird way. I didn't become a different person when I was there, but I got to be braver, and I got to, I got to put any insecurity that I had about myself and my work behind and start new in that way. And I also got to reimagine the studio. Well, every time I've moved, I've learned from moving the studio and how to rebuild it in a way to better suit the work that I want to make, which has become a fundamental part of my studio practice, is what the actual studio feels like. And so, I had this, after living in Chicago for a few years, I moved to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which is about 2 hours north of, or about an hour and a half north of Milwaukee. And I was really scared to move there because there's not a lot there. And I felt like I would be isolated from other artists, and I thought that I would just disappear. But in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, you can afford a great studio. So I had this 5,000 square foot studio to begin playing with. And it meant that I could work on multiple things at once. I wasn't stepping over myself like I was in Chicago. So that was like the first iteration of figuring out how the studio and I have to become this like one thing. Then the places themselves, the people that you meet in all these, in all the locations that I live, like, I feel like sometimes I'm a little bit of a chaos monster. And, when we moved to Philadelphia, I felt home. Like that place is chaos. But it's a beautiful, beautiful chaos. And I just feel like sometimes like toggling back and forth between living in cities and living remotely fuels a kind of energy that I need, for the production that I do. It's like I go back and forth from being like around lots of people to being isolated. And, it helps keep me human. I like to be withdrawn, and I like my own time in the studio, but then I like to go out and be social, or force myself to be social, because I don't actually love it that much. No.
And we force you to be so social all the time.
All the time. All the time. But it ends up being okay. You see the benefit of it.
Because you have that back and forth.
Yeah.
And as being an object maker too, it's like you need to be able to have that space. It's not like working from a computer where like so many artists who have their entire atelier in their hand
Yeah, I don't, I couldn't do what I do without, the studio spaces and that I've built for myself. And I'm currently trying, to land on like a final iteration. I guess I'm tired. I don't want to move anymore. And I'm trying to figure out this final iteration of a studio. And I've got really big dreams, and I think I figured it out. So hopefully when I'm back from this trip, I'll be able to start building that space, and it'll be great.
It will be great. So talking about chaos, and chaos theory, I'm gonna throw it out to you. Inject a little bit of chaos in. If anybody has any questions, we have 2 mics on either side too. If you all wanna stand up and ask David anything.
No question.
One talk left.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just didn't hear her say she drank the water meant for the gods. What is that? Where did you do that installation?
So that was I drank the water that was meant for the orchids. It does have a god in it though. I built that for a museum called the Villa Terrace Decorative Arts Museum, which is this very funny space in Milwaukee. It's like an Italianate villa that was built on the waterfront. And they do a lot of decorative art shows, and they have, I think, about 10 or 11 spaces within that building. And they asked me if I wanted to come in and take over the whole museum. So I did, and I built, I think, 6 new installations, and then used 3 older works for that exhibition. But that piece was in one of them. They have these kind of thematic rooms. Some had dark wood paneling, and some had that beautiful French wallpaper. And so I built that piece with that room in mind, utilizing that kind of tropical wallpaper that was in the background to amplify the materials and the colors that I used in the piece.
What happens to that installation? Is that only it's a temporary?
No, I built it for that space, and then I exhibited it at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville. They invited me for an exhibition there, and so it's been exhibited twice, and it currently lives in crates in my storage unit. It's sometimes difficult to build large installations, and then I've been very fortunate, and things like my own personal ghost, the more atelier-based installation, they do get acquired, and so that one was split between 3 different institutions, and they each took a tableau, and we kind of created an agreement that if they travel it or if they want to exhibit it, they would borrow from the other 2 institutions to put it all back together again. They're also allowed to show the tableau, that each institution acquired individually, but it's better when the whole thing is together.
On that note, with your current exhibition, Midnight, do you see the birds as being, something that has to remain as a whole, like 10,332 or however many you said, or is it like the individual object that later after do you see them, being on their own and kind of how does that work as far as?
Yeah, I haven't really figured that out, but just for
Yeah.
fun, like a show of hands, how many people in this room own one of those birds? Okay, there's a couple. Because I did them as these gestures of kind of necessity from the studio, they have existed as individuals, and I have given quite a few away to people that I care about, or people that have helped me, or people that have been impactful in some way. They're a gift. They're the best gift. Midnight, because the volume of them doesn't necessarily matter. If the show moves to a different location and the space changes, it may be less. If the space grows, I might be inclined to make more. I really didn't, and don't often think about, and this is a horrible thing to say, but I don't think about where they're going to go or how I'm going to sell them until I'm feasible about it. So I don't know what, could I see it going further? Yeah. Do I want to make more birds? Not right now.
That was gonna be my next question. I was like, I thought after our last conversation, like, this is it.
It got
Birds
hairy.
are like-
It got really hairy.
Yeah. But I think that what was so beautiful about that too is like the intimacy that you had with that form. And so that it also became very, yeah, that you weren't thinking while producing. But there were times where we would be having conversations about the installation and the details, and then it'd just be constantly just be like this production line of birds. And so your hands intuitively knew where to go and what to do to be able to create this form.
Yeah. I mean, I love making that form, and it is second nature to me now. But I'm okay for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, it got, it was like, I got asked to do the exhibition, and then we measured the space, and I calculated how many I would need to do it the way that I saw it in my mind's eye, and then I had to figure out how many I needed to make a day, how many I needed to make a week, and that's a daunting part of making things that I don't love, is when you put those numbers in front of yourself, and you know that it's going to be a tough year because of how much you have to toil. It's like the embroidery. When I figured out exactly how much I could embroider in an hour, it made it so that if I got a commission or if somebody approached me to do an embroidery project, I could say, like, yeah, that's going to take me X amount of time. But with the clay work, there's so many variables. My kiln broke twice during the production of the show, and so I wasn't able to make birds during those repairs. And then also there was a plaster shortage in the U.S. That was right at the beginning. I was so gung-ho to start working on this project, and I need to make 100 plaster molds to be able to produce the 200 birds a day. And I went to the supply place, and they were like, there's no plaster anywhere. And so I had to occupy myself in another way, knowing that like every day that passed by, I was getting more and more behind, and I would have to catch up. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask a question from TJ, that you asked about the craft and art. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
And craft.
Don't have to do that.
I'm just
No, I got you.
Firstly, great to see you. And secondly, the conversation of how much of it craft is art, art is craft. Like, do you get this debate as part of your stillness sort of reflection exercise as well, or?
Can I tell you the dumbest story? It's so anecdotal, but it's great. When I was a kid, it was just called arts and crafts. That's what you did in school. It was arts and crafts time. So when I went to university to study arts and crafts, I just thought we were still doing that. I didn't think, I didn't divide it. It was like, take painting, take ceramics. I didn't take ceramics when I was in school. But yeah, I never really separated it. The materials are all materials. And I think that we face this as artists a lot, and I'm going to call you an artist and not a craftsperson. But we're faced with the genderization of materials, we put these things in corners, and then we become fearful to use them because people will make assumptions about your background or how you're using them. But they are all usable. Some require, more acknowledgement of their histories and the craftspersonship that is required to be able to use them. But they should all be made available to people that want to make interesting things to look at, art or craft. I did it twice in my life. I really thought art and craft was one thing, and when I got to NASCAD at the time, in that second semester, first year, you're kind of divided into, your groups. Yeah, you're made to choose what track you're going down. And I was going down the list, and it was craft and 3D form. And I was like, 3D form, that's sculpture, cool. And so I started taking this class with Francis Dorsey, who's amazing. And I'm like, we're going through the syllabi, we're talking about, what we're going to learn in that class. And I was like, this doesn't sound all correct. many techniques that I then got to incorporate into my other works. And then like fast forward to, you know, like being in your last year at NASCAD, and again, you're kind of now expected to be in your little pockets, and I started doing more textile work, and I started doing, you know, other things in this like very sculpturally heavy group. And there was these conversations, you know, like, how is this sculpture? It's like, yeah, great, let's talk about it. How is it not sculpture? You know, how are all these things? How is like, you know, designing clothes? How is structuring fashion not sculptural? So, I don't know. While in school and everybody's still doing the art and craft debate, I really can't participate in it because I believe that we should just do it all and call it whatever we want. I still don't really specify that I'm a sculptor or a ceramic artist or a textile artist. I can't. And when I was in grad school, I had a really amazing mentor, Jim Zanzi, he was the dean of the school at one point. He's photo-based and in his practice, and you know, but he had been the advisor to so many really amazing, successful artists, and he said to me, you know, like, you use so many different materials and you work in so many different ways, it's like it either work really well for you or really backfire, you know, because his concern was that nobody would know where to place me in terms of like what types of shows I'm invited to do or what types of institutions. But, you know, I feel like I've been somewhat successful in it because, you know, I do like existing in all these different art spaces, you know, craft museums or white cubes, commercial spaces, you know, institutions that are more experimental and project-based. I just want to stay available to all of it. Fashion is sculpture.
Go for it, in the back.
Should I just yell or should I get a mic?
Just yell it.
Okay. I liked how you described yourself as like autodidactic in kind of way you approach materials. And I was wondering if in your role as like a mentor and instructor, if you encounter students that have that same kind of impulse and how you mentor and nurture that kind of voracious approach to materials and process in your students.
I mean, that's a great question, Mom. When students approach me with a project, I get really excited really fast. And the class that I'm teaching right now at the Milwaukee Institute of Art Design, my students are already there. It's called Standpoints and Circumstances. And really what my role is, while they're in their thesis year, while they're building, you know, their projects for their last year of university, is to act as like a kind contrarian, to come into their studio and say like, why are you using this material? Why are you doing it this way? Consider this. So it requires me to have like a really strong knowledge base of ways of making, but it also requires me to be super conscious about why people are making the things they're making, and not to try to shift certain elements of their work based off of like my lived experiences, still focus on their lived experiences, and then how to get them to acknowledge and how to get them to recognize that when people go to see work in museums or gallery spaces, they're coming to it from many different perspectives. People go to museums for educational purposes, they go as entertainment. Not everybody has like a big art background when they go look at work. And so how do you use the right materials and the right ways of making to translate your ideas so that people can understand it and not be, to not put too many buffers on, and to not care what people's opinions are about their work and how successful they were at conveying their ideas. So yeah, when students come to me, they start, you know, it's probably obnoxious for them, but I spend a good, or maybe too much time trying to get to know what their interests are and how they think and how they work, because I don't want to rush into giving students advice that it's going to be counterintuitive to how they need to navigate the process themselves. I try to be pushy while being respectful. Yeah, I don't know everything, and that's another really fun thing, is that I'm still always learning things. So if a student has a question and I don't know the answer, it's an opportunity for me to also research with them, which is a great joy for me, because yeah, we get to go down these avenues should say that like from the start, you know, like when I graduated from undergrad, I had like a really great technical base, but my ideas were not super. I think that that's the same with everybody, when they're fresh, when they're, you know, 20 years old, 21 years old, finishing school. And it's just become this race between the two things. Like, you know, I think through my ideas more, and then I develop the materials and the structures alongside of it. But it's taken me years to be brave, to put more of myself, the autobiography of myself into the work. And I still use tactics and ways of working that make me feel safe, like, you know, the display case or the vitrine, or even when I put like a vinyl cover over these cushions, like, I'm constantly using these imagined structures of protection to make me feel brave enough to put my story, put my narrative out there. You know, this is all just me acting as my own psychiatrist in the studio. How do I make work for people that talks about myself, that also talks about my feelings, your feelings, all of our feelings, without being too vulnerable, without being too mushy. Yeah, and that's why I can never feel like it's done, because I'm constantly growing in the work, and I'm constantly feeling like I can put more of myself. Making this body of work for Burlington Midnight is a hugely personal piece. It's about, you know, it's this idea of like trying to understand something that has such magnitude, something so big and so unsurmountable. How do you cope with like heartbreak or loss without breaking it into thousands and thousands of pieces and holding it in your hand and working through it every day? You know, it's bushy, but it's the reality of it. You know, what started off as just a piece of iconography in the studio became a symbol of like, you know, the greatest task I've ever undertaken, which is figuring out, you know, myself and figuring out my relationship with my ideas and materials. And so yeah, every time something leaves the studio, when I go through so much work to put myself into it, to make it beautiful and to make it accessible to other people, it is hard to say goodbye to things. Yeah.
I just need to let everybody know we're almost out of time, and so I think there would be time for one more question. If anybody has one last question.
I just have a number of things I'm intrigued.
Okay.
How did you choose David? Or how does that work that you decided, or
It's a long relationship. And I first worked with David at the Art Gallery of Mississauga in 2008, I think. And it was from seeing a very striking image of his embroidery and taxidermy work. And started to work together. And then I think, again, because of the pandemic, is that everybody was as close and as far away at the same time. So I realized that I wanted to be able to make connections with artists that I had been working with over the years, and reached out to see what David was working on in his studio, and there were birds. And I think that that's when, specifically talking about what happens when a person who is such a maker, and when a debilitating anxiety of not being able to make is present, and that everyone's facing it together, that it, again, that idea of breaking apart the big into the small, into the handheld, was just such a poignant way of being able to explain what we were all collectively going through at the time, that I felt like it was necessary for our audiences to be able to experience it. And back to the conversation about craft and contemporary art, is that we have all these studios, and the bindery exists within those studios
to